Well, a couple of months ago, Derek called and asked me if I would be willing to preach on this week, this first Sunday after his departure. Even though worship and preaching are not part of my new job description, he kindly suggested that this might be a way to provide pastoral care to the congregation as we move into this time of transition. I agreed. And shortly after doing so, I read an article in Anabaptist World magazine that was written by Ron Adams, who is a Mennonite pastor currently in Pennsylvania. He was addressing some questions that sometimes come from non-Mennonites calling his various congregations, asking about what Mennonites are and what the dress code is if they might come to visit on a Sunday morning. And he was also talking about the struggle that some Mennonites and our congregations have with those types of questions and the move that is happening in some places to remove the label of Mennonite from church names. So after talking about his experiences with that, he writes, "Rather than jettison the name, its history, and its baggage, suppose we accept the need to show and tell the world around us who this particular group of Mennonites is. An explanation akin to what Peter talked about, to share the reasons for the hope within us." He's quoting 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. Ron Adams continues, "And not only some generalized hope, but the hope specific to us as a congregation. What does it look like? Where does it come from? How do we live out of and into that hope? It is up to every congregation," he writes, "to discern its own course. It is every congregation's responsibility to look inward and outward to discover what God is doing among and around them." Now, I know we don't have the word Mennonite in our church name, and I don't think there's any conversation about changing our church name, and that's not what I'm suggesting. But something about his article and this idea about naming the hope specific to us as a congregation grabbed hold of me. And I've been mulling over it for 6 or 8 weeks now. It just felt like the right topic for this Sunday. The Hebrew words that are used in the Hebrew scriptures to talk about hope give us a really physical sense of stretching out toward something or waiting and longing for it. Commentators note that the Greek word that's used for hope can have sort of positive connotations, but it could also have negative connotations. It's sort of just expecting or waiting with either sense of positive or negative. But in the New Testament, hope never has a vague or a fearful sense. It's always the expectation of something good. True hope is grounded in God. It brings peace. It's a daily practice of faithfulness and trust, of reaching out toward what God is doing and what God will yet do. In his commentary on 1 Peter, Erland Waltner, I remember Erland sitting in the seminary. I think he'd retired by that point, but he would often sit on campus and just read, and he always said hello and knew my name, even though I'd never had a course with him. Erland quotes the Jewish psychoanalyst Erich Fromm. "To have faith means to dare, to think the unthinkable, yet to act within the limits of the realistically possible. It is the paradoxical hope to expect the Messiah every day, yet not to lose heart when he has not come at the appointed hour. To hope is not passive and it is not patient. On the contrary, it is impatient and active, looking for every possibility of action within the realm of real possibilities." It's interesting to note that the words of 1 Peter ring out over and over again in the testimony of the early Anabaptists as it's recorded in the Martyr's Mirror. These scriptures from 1 Peter are words that they quoted as they were being arrested and tortured and killed. And the words from 1 Peter are also central to the theology of Menno Simons, for whom our denomination is named. Now, Peter was writing his letter to Christian believers in scattered faith communities, people who were somehow, he names them resident aliens, or perhaps it could be translated homeless strangers, people with complicated and probably marginalized legal and cultural status, people who were often misunderstood by their neighbors, who also made false interpretations and leveled unfounded accusations against them. So these were people who lived in a truly oppressive and hostile environment. And into that context, Peter writes, "No one can hurt you if you are determined to do only what is right. If you do have to suffer for being good, you will count it a blessing. There is no need to be afraid or to worry about them. Simply reverence the Lord in your hearts and always have your answer ready for people who ask you the reason for the hope you all have." That's 1 Peter 3:13 through 15. Now, I am not in any way pretending that our context is oppressive or hostile like those of the first Jesus followers or the early Anabaptists. We are, on the whole, I think, people with great privilege and status. But we are, as a congregation in a tender time of transition, saying goodbye to what has been and looking ahead to what might be, all with a mixture of grief, guilt, trepidation, anxiety, expectation, longing, exhaustion, excitement. You name many more emotions, I'm sure. I feel drawn to Ron Adams' article and to his challenge to show and tell the reasons for our hope. The reasons specific to us here at New Creation Fellowship. The ways that we can name what God has done among us, and the ways we are stretching out, waiting and longing for God to show up and be at work now and in the future, in us and through us. Maybe there are reasons that we have hoped that have come to an end. Now that Derek has left, reasons that we might have to mourn and let go of. Just like those disciples on the road to Emmaus who said, "We had hoped that this Jesus was the one who would," and Jesus has to open their eyes to something new. I pray we will all be open today, in the weeks and months and year ahead, to pay attention to new reasons, new invitation to growth, ways that God's Spirit is moving and nudging us during this transition period and beyond. I hope that you would share these with each other and with me. You can certainly do so during the sharing time today, but don't let today be the end of this showing and telling. I do believe with all of my heart that there is no need for us to be afraid or to worry. God is among us. God has been and God will be with New Creation Fellowship. May we open our eyes, our hearts, and our hands to reach out toward that hope that is being offered. Amen.